Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Limitless Show. Today, my guest and I will be talking about seeking acceptance and how this can actually be fatal for your happiness. So if that interests you, then definitely have a listen. My guest today is so special. I'm so grateful to call her a friend. We only recently met, but honestly, I don't think I've ever met anyone who can quite write down how they're feeling so well. And you can really see this in her video, so definitely go check out her channel. I'll put all the details in the description below. But thank you so much for being here. My guest is Ari. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. So today we're talking about seeking acceptance. And for anyone who has not watched any of the Limitless shows, basically what I do is I bring a new guest here every single week and we talk about a limitation that they've had in their life and how they've overcome it, in the hopes that if you're struggling with the same thing, you can overcome it too. So, Ari, can you just tell me, how has seeking acceptance kind of limited you in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of this started in my childhood, which might be where a lot of issues start for us, whether or not we realize it. But at a very young age, I felt like I was always being told what I should and should not do. And I think a lot of that comes naturally with parenting, and parents are trying to raise and groom a kid. They're trying to teach them the right lessons, but for me, a lot of those lessons didn't seem right. There was nothing immoral about them, there was nothing wrong about their values, but there were things that my parents always tried to get me to do and get involved in that I felt like weren't me. They didn't honor who I was. They weren't things that added value to my life. And it's not that I didn't have other interests. I did. It's just there was a lot of, their influence from other people about how they should raise me. And coming from a different generation, my parents weren't born or raised in America. So there's a lot of different cultural aspects there as well. So from a young age, getting groomed to, be a pianist, having different auditions and recitals. I auditioned at Princeton. I was kind of like told that I should do swimming as another hobby. I played chess, and there were a lot of these activities that weren't me at all. They caused me a lot of stress and anxiety. But my parents thought that these were activities that would teach me discipline and focus and lessons that, again, foundationally might be really good for someone. But I always felt that there was a resistance there. I always felt like they weren't things that honored me. They weren't things that made me feel good or whole. And they caused a lot of stress and negativity in my life that my parents would always go back to, this is good for you, and they would ignore it. So over time, I learned that doing things that don't feel right is not a bad thing, that there's a reason why we're supposed to do things that don't feel good, that we're supposed to stay in situations, in groups, in activities that don't make us feel good, that cause us stress, cause us negativity. And over the course of my life, I took what was maybe a very small principle from my parents, and it compounded. It compounded into the kinds of friendships that I had with people. It compounded into what I decided to study in school. And it kind of brought me to this point now. I'm 23 and I'm kind of taking a step back, and I've started to realize, okay, this is not really my life trajectory. This is not my path. But it's caused a lot of discomfort over the course of a life, for sure, that now I'm working backwards through and trying to reconcile.
If it's been going on for like the majority of your life, is it only recently now that you've realized that actually seeking acceptance isn't the way forward for you? It's something that you needed to change. Is it only recently that you've discovered that?
Yes, exactly. I think the resistance had always been there, and a lot of my energies as a kid, right? I think there's another point here that can be valuable that ties into seeking acceptance, which is that a lot of the behaviors that we do, they might seem on the surface like they're okay. They might not seem overtly like issues or problematic, but if you get to the root of them, if you get to the deeper level of what they all kind of mean and represent, there can be, really, really detrimental patterns there for you. So resistance, right? Like you would think kids rebel. You go through a teenage phase, the kid's just going to rebel. So there's another point of me being told, right, like, and me being labeled, my behavior being labeled as this is just normal teenage rebellious. She doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to get involved. When in reality, a lot of that was just deep-seated negative feelings and emotions towards my life and towards, situations that I had been put in that weren't serving me, that made me feel deeply unwell. Deep anxiety, deep depression, deep sadness, deep stress. But a lot of that was just kind of waxed over with this grand idea of this is just normal behavior. So that was another way that, came in as a layer, and it made it really challenging for me to even start to realize that this was a problem. But recently, I have started to kind of just snap out of that. The resistance has always been there, but coming out of it has definitely been a little bit more abrupt than the pattern of that kind of historically.
Yeah. So what I've learned on this like self-development journey is that the reasons we do things, there's always a reason behind it. So for seeking acceptance, there's probably millions of reasons why people want to seek acceptance. Why do you think people seek acceptance? Why did you do it?
Yeah, I think it's very natural to want to be loved and to feel like you belong. I think these are things that on a deeply human level, it's part of our humanity. It's just part of what we crave. We crave love and to feel like we belong. And people don't want to feel like they're outcast. People don't want to be made to feel like they're different. They don't want to be made to feel like they stand out, because we want to feel like we're loved. We want to feel like we're accepted, and we want to feel like we have value. We want to feel like we bring meaning to other people's lives and to this world. So I think it's very natural to want to be accepted by other people. And I don't think necessarily that those things are inherently bad. I just think that it's very important that you're very strategic about the ways that you want to be accepted, and that whatever you're doing, whatever kinds of ways that you're behaving, the activities that you partake in, the friendships that you have, the work that you do, it needs to make you feel deeply good
and happy and what aligns with you.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So for someone who, and I think, and I don't want to talk on your behalf, but I certainly still seek acceptance. I still want to be loved. When I post on social media, I like that feeling of people liking it. I think everyone does. It's ingrained in us, and social media is made that way for us to want it. But basically, what are you doing right now? Because are you still struggling with it? Like, what are you implementing into your life? How are you overcoming this kind of limitation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe to kind of answer that more wholly, I'll take a step back and talk about the kind of abrupt change that happened in my life that made me realize that. So I had that experience with my parents, being groomed, getting into activities that didn't make me feel well. And that really spilled over into creating trauma for me at varying levels of severity, but it guided the kinds of friendships that I had, and it guided who I was and how I showed up in these social circles, and how I kind of dictated my life. And actually last year I came out to myself, and I had no real inclination of thinking that I was gay. It just kind of happened. It came out of the woodworks. I met someone and made me realize, oh, okay, this is just not a normal friend thing. And that was the first day consciously that I started accepting who I really was. I think subconsciously, maybe because I had all these patterns built up over the course of a life, I was subduing that. Like, I wasn't aware of that because I had lived a life thinking you have to be on the straight and narrow. Everything needs to be perfect, and you can't deviate from the plan. You can't deviate from who you're expected to be. And it kind of just erupted from me. I don't even know how much credit I can give to myself. It just is something that happened, and very little of that was out of my control. I think my subconscious got to a point where it was just acting on my behalf. So I kind of thank something deep down inside me for doing the work that I think on a, personal surface level, I was a little too shy to do myself. But when I went through those conversations with people and I started coming out to other people, I just felt like for the first time, I was really being myself. And there was nothing that I was hiding. All the anxiety, all the shame, all the guilt, all the stress, it washed away. It washed away seemingly out of thin air. And I was talking to people as me. I wasn't talking to people as Ariana, or the girl who was studying this, or the girl with these friends, or the girl who did this kind of stuff. I was me. I wasn't a version of me that I wanted other people to accept. And I was excited. I was very happy about it. And so having those conversations with people who weren't necessarily accepting, that's when I started to get those red flags triggered. And so what happened, the real change was recognizing the things that people were saying to me about that, the way that they were trying to overcome their emotional, history about how it made them feel that I was saying this stuff about me. And none of those people had a fundamental value problem with me saying that I like girls. The problem was always, oh, what's someone going to think about this? Oh, how is this going to affect you when you're trying to find a job? And I just started to really understand people are giving me advice based on how they think other people are going to view me, not about how they feel about what I'm saying. And that's when it really started to hit me, because I started to realize that everyone in this life really is influenced by their own fears. And everyone's limiting beliefs really are compiled based off how other people view what they think is going to limit them. It has very little to do with how you personally view yourself and how you personally view others. And I realized I can't base the way that I live a life on what someone else thinks that other people are going to think about me. It's just way too far removed to care. So in honoring myself and in figuring out who I really was and who I really wanted to be, I just started to get that feeling, all that anxiety and stress that I felt towards myself, I started feeling towards other people, because I felt how people were being fraudulent in their own lives. And I felt like people weren't honoring themselves. And that became the filter for me. That became the feedback loop, where I realized, instead of how am I going to get these people to like me, I loved myself already. So I didn't need to worry about showing up and getting that acceptance from other people. I just needed to listen to what they were saying about who they thought I was. If I didn't think that they were acting out of how they truly felt because of their value system or because of their own personal opinions, then I just couldn't listen to it. So that's been the real guide for all my friends now, and the way that I talk to my family and the way that I move through my life is this person giving me advice? Are they talking to me on my level? Are they really trying to understand and level and resonate with me? Or are they just bringing all of their fears and all of their personal limitations to this conversation?
You worded that so well, especially about, it's not even what people think about you, it's what they think other people will think about you. And if you're thinking that way, you have to be hella good at chess, because you have to think 5 different steps ahead. And the thing with us, we always worry what people think about us, but we don't know if what they're thinking about us is actually true, because we're making up these stories in our head. So other people are bound to be making up these stories. So their limitations might not even be a problem, they're just making it into a problem. But it sounds like you are living such an easier life by not worrying about those other people or what those other people think other people are thinking, and just living to who you are and just being accepting of yourself. I was a little worried before this conversation, because I thought it was kind of like seeking acceptance is similar to people pleasing, and I've already done a video on people pleasing. It was a great video, and if anyone wants to see it, I'll put it in the cards above. I realize now it's really not. People pleasing and seeking acceptance are quite similar, but I think the way to get over seeking acceptance, and prove me if I'm wrong, but is by accepting yourself. Because once you accept yourself, you don't need to seek acceptance from anyone else, because you have this underlying faith that you are amazing. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, because you love you. So what I want to ask you now, and you've already said previously that you do love yourself and you didn't worry about that because you loved who you were, but how does one accept themselves? How would I accept myself? How do you accept yourself? What do you do in daily practices, or what mindset shifts have you changed to accept yourself? Have you always accepted yourself?
I definitely have not always accepted myself. This is definitely very recent. It's kind of like realizing that I was gay was the catalyst for a lot of this. And it's kind of like slotted in all of these new behavioral tactics for me that I think a lot of that was not conscious. It kind of just happened for me. So I don't know how much credit I can give to myself for forging the path. But what I would say is that it's very important that you get to know yourself. And I don't mean get to know yourself in this, kind of surface level, what's your public self-image. I think you need to know the ins and outs of who you are. And I do not think that is as difficult as people make it out to seem. I think a lot of the difficulty that comes from what you might call like inner work comes from the fact that people are wading through these thick layers of, what did that person say about me? What did this person say? Is this really who I am? I don't want to do that because I'm scared about what I'm going to see. It's a lot of fear. It's a lot of avoidance. But who you are, I think, is something that we can all accept. And I don't mean necessarily accept as in I love who I am today and that's it. And I'm just going to kind of force myself to love who I am. Because I think loving yourself and accepting yourself are two very different things. They might seem similar, but the way that you go about those is very different. Accepting yourself is just about being able to inventory your life, inventorying who you are today, what you've been through, the kind of person that you are. And loving yourself, right, is about becoming who you want to be. And you're not going to love who you are if you're not first accepting what's happened to you and you're not accepting who you've shown up in so far through your life. And that's really key, because if I hadn't done that, and I'm still definitely working through that in that aspect, like there's a lot of trauma that I'm working through now. I'm planning on going to therapy to work through some of the deeper traumas that I've experienced, but like with, COVID and the world being shut down, I'm kind of doing what I can on the side before that. But you can't be ashamed of who you are. You can't look at what's happened to you and the ways that you've moved through your life and judge yourself for them, because we're all learning. No one's going to love themselves right off the bat. I don't think we're born loving who we are, because we're not born with this, innate awareness about who we are. It's something that you cultivate over a lifetime. But you have to sit with yourself, understand what you've been through, who you are, and you have to look at that, and you have to be able to stare yourself in the mirror and say, this is who you are today. And if you don't like it, that's a good thing, because if you don't like who you are and you feel like you're uncomfortable with who you are and the image that you're presenting to the world today, that resistance is precisely the catalyst that's going to motivate you and inspire you to seek better.
Honestly, I said at the start that you were so good at writing, but now I just know that you're just so good at speaking too. Oh, I can listen to you all day. I love how you, I've never thought about that. I used to think accepting yourself and loving yourself were obviously similar, but yeah, accepting yourself is accepting who you are now, and loving yourself is loving yourself enough to become the person you want to be by doing the things that you need to do to become that person. I love that. I just want to say, for accepting yourself as well, it's kind of about forgiving yourself, because you need to forgive yourself for what you've done, because what you did in the past, you did that because that's how you knew to behave. Like, you didn't know any better. Obviously, if the same things came around now, you'd probably act differently. Is there any mindset shifts that you had to do with accepting yourself? Just like kind of bullet points on, is it just sitting within the day and saying, am I okay? Am I happy with how I am? Is that how you do it?
Yes. So journaling became very big for me over the last, I would say at this point, 11 months. So not just shy under a full year. Part of that was because I just started working full time last year, because I graduated from university and started working in August. And I felt that resistance again. I felt the resistance pop up, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I think all the typical things that, a middle to early age, in your 20s you're kind of going to experience naturally. Journaling got me through that. Journaling every day with no like rules, there's no limitations, there's no I needed to do it, and there wasn't even pressure to do it on a daily basis. It's not like that was mandatory, but anytime that I felt something, it came to me. So in the beginnings of that, I always sat down for an hour before work. I just went to a local Starbucks, plugged in some music, and I kind of just let whatever flow, you know, of my thoughts come out. And then over time, what I started to realize, even though I never really went back to those journals, getting into that daily habit of connecting with myself for whatever amount of time I felt was necessary for that day, kind of put the wheels in motion to cultivate and spark a self-awareness that had I not baked that hour into my day, I wouldn't have been able to experience at all. And I think over a long period of time, even though I never really went back to those journals to kind of figure out like, ooh, what are the patterns here? What am I working on? It just brought all the deep thoughts that I felt down up to the surface. And it was this creative, fun, playful thing. No one's going to see it. It's not like I'm going to therapy. I'm not sitting down with like friends and having these deep, intense coffee hours. It's very much up to you. So I would say journal every day if you can. No limits, no rules, no methodologies. Just think and sit with yourself and kind of jot things down as they come, because when you've got a whole lot flowing in here, it's really difficult to wade through it. But when you can put something down on paper, you get the feeling of empowerment because you've been able to kind of look down and say, it's a form of artwork, really, being able to connect with yourself and say, I wrote this, like I thought this, and I was able to kind of put this down on paper and construct my thoughts in a clear and concise way. And then it's also something that once you put it down, it goes from just, again, being in your head and it's this vague, uncertain, opaque thing to transparent, clear. You can visualize it. You can look at what you're feeling. And I think that's a very powerful tool, that we're visual creatures. We have, right, eyes. Like we need to perceive everything in our environments in order to understand what's happening. So I think it's a very powerful tool that's very innate in us to be able to kind of like look down and see what's going on and allow us to inventory something as opposed to just keeping it in the head.
I find that because it's just so hard having everything up in your head. Once it's down on paper, you can kind of let go of it as well, and then continue to live in the present because you're not thinking about everything in the past or the future. You can just kind of be you in this moment. What I want to ask you now is, you said previously when you were in this state of seeking acceptance, it kind of got you in a kind of depressive, anxious kind of state. I want to know what you would say to that person. What would you say to your past you who was seeking acceptance? What would you say to them?
That's such a good question. I think we get scared that we're not going to be loved because of who we are, if who we are differs from who we think we should be. And if you're thinking like that, to your point about, you know, having 5 people down the road like chess, how are you going to be able to figure out how someone's going to think about you? Then how's that going to, it's a domino effect. We're always thinking out, right? And if I could go back, I would tell my past self that you need to go in. You need to stop looking around. You need to close your eyes. You need to put the blinders on, and you just need to get real with yourself. And I would also tell her that fear is a paper wall. This is something that a friend of mine shared with me a few months ago, and it has since really resonated with me. We think fear is this brick wall. We think that it's completely unbreakable. We think it's a thick barrier and there's no way to get around it. We think it has all this weight and power and strength, and like there's no way possible that we're going to be able to break through it. But fear is really just this thin paper sheet. Now, the difference is you don't realize that until you are willing to commit yourself to running at it as if it's that thick steel wall. But you just break through fear. The second that you can take the initiative to say, this is something that I'm going to work through, it's crazy how that'll manifest into your ability to break things down. And it's only in hindsight that you can realize that. But I would tell that to my younger self. I would say, run out the wall, stop caring about other people's opinions, and you don't need to tackle the world. It doesn't need to be, how am I going to love myself, and how am I going to overcome my body images, or how am I going to overcome this stress and anxiety and never be stressed or anxious again. I would just tell her to do little things. I would tell her to do little things like, if you don't want to go to the mall with your friends, just say no. And don't worry about it. Just try to say no. And get in the habit of saying no. And get in the habit of asking yourself what you want. Because that's the only way that you're going to break through that wall. And it's crazy that all of this change really has just come from that simple act of running at something that only in hindsight do I realize was something that I had completely conjured up in my head. It's not something that really existed in the world. It's something that my mind decided to create. And the mind is a very powerful drug. The mind is a very powerful tool. It tells us stories. It tells us things that scare us and demotivate us all the time. But all those resources and all those tactics that can harm us, if you utilize them and you turn them into a way that's going to help you positively, can become phenomenal superpowers that just supercharge you into self-mastery and excelling at whoever you want to become. So fear is not some big scary thing. It's actually really small and very overcomable.
We're so much stronger than we think we are. And it's crazy that how that one thing can ripple into other things. And once you prove yourself that you can get through that one fear, you get through other fears and you just become this person. But like you said, you can't see that person in the future. But once you're there, you can look back on yourself and think, wow, how far have I actually come from just doing that one thing? Rounding up this off, this interview, this talk on seeking acceptance, is there any kind of final words you would say to anyone who is struggling with seeking acceptance? What would you say to them?
I would say that at the end of the day, there's always going to be people telling you who you should be, what you should do. People are always going to have opinions. And even inside yourself, there can be 1,000 voices in your head at any given time saying you should do something, you shouldn't do something, you should fear this, you should go for it. It's not that people who get after what they want in life don't have those voices, because everyone's flooding people with opinions and their thoughts. You need to cultivate the relationship to the voice inside that you want to listen to. And if you want something in this world, whether it's really big or it's really small to you, the only person who's going to be able to achieve that is yourself. You're the sole agent of your life, and you have a lot more power and a lot more responsibility to yourself than you might think that you do. And life is not always perfect, and it's not this thing that just kind of naturally happens to us. I think there are levels to fate, and there are levels to things that are just going to kind of happen that we can't control. But life is something that you can design. You can curate and build a life that you want to live. It's not something that is just set in stone waiting for you. The only thing that's set in stone is the fact that you've got a hammer in your hand, and you've got a wall, and you've got something that you can break through and carve down into whatever you want to shape it into. So I would say pick up the hammer and get started.
Get carving. Wow. I can't even add anything to that. You're just really inspiring. And if anyone else has been inspired by Ariana, please go check out her content. I'll put everything in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Limitless Show. And Ariana, thank you so much for being here. If you've enjoyed this, then please let us know by pressing that like button, putting a comment in the comments, pressing subscribe and the bell button so you never miss an episode of The Limitless Show. I will definitely see you next week. And thank you so much, Ariana. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.